You're listening to the Joy of Champagne podcast, your guide to the world of sparkling wines. And now your host, Deniz Bayram.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Joy of Champagne. I'm your host, Deniz Bayram. The last episode, we were busy uncovering the true story of champagne. So in this episode, it would only be proper to discover the story of its distant Italian cousin and its most important competitor, which is of course none other than Prosecco. I anticipate that almost everyone who's listening has heard of Prosecco, or at least have been hearing increasingly more about it. First of all, let's talk about what Prosecco is. Just like champagne, or most other wine in Europe for that matter, before being the name of a wine, Prosecco was and still is the name of a location. This time, it's a village in northeast Italy. For the ones who've been living under a rock for the last decade, let's reminisce what Prosecco wine as we know of today is like in a nutshell. Prosecco is a beautifully effervescent wine and the most popular sparkling wine from Italy, as well as one of the most popular one in the world. Specifically, it's from the regions of Veneto and Friuli-Venezia Giulia. And yes, that's the name of a single region. The reason why this tiny village of Prosecco gave its name to the wine produced in a massive area surrounding it is that the grape of Prosecco, as well as the wine itself, was first made near this village, but then obviously it grew and spread incredibly. Prosecco is also the name of the grape that was and still is used to make Prosecco, although it is now called a different name to avoid confusion. And its current name is Glera, which is what gives the wine its joyful and floral character. Prosecco is generally very affordable compared to champagne, and for that reason it can offer a solid price-to-quality ratio, which is the main reason behind its incredible global surge in popularity, particularly in the UK and in North America. As a rule of thumb, the mass-produced popular Prosecco always offers a simpler, more modest but charming flavor profile than champagne, also with less fizz and foam than champagne. This is because it is made with the much simpler Charmat method compared to the more complex and arguably superior champagne method, but it is definitely a wonderfully unique and a joyful wine in its own right. So, how did the story of Prosecco start? Maybe not as controversial and entertaining as the story of champagne, but Prosecco has a story that's also deeply rooted in history and certainly worth telling, which isn't surprising considering it comes from the heartland of Europe. Prosecco, just like its cousin champagne, did not start as a bubbly wine, but as a still wine. Because, let us not forget, you need to have still wine first to discover bubbles and understand how they work. According to the historic record, the word Prosecco was first uttered by an Englishman named Fynes Moryson in 1593 during his travels. But chances are that this wine he was referring to probably wasn't sparkling yet. By the beginning of the 16th century, however, wine of the Prosecco area was made from the local grape Ribolla, which is still very popular today, although not for Prosecco making. This Ribolla wine was known as Castellum Nobile Vinum Puccinum, after the castle near the village of Prosecco. Pliny the Elder, the famous Greek philosopher and writer, spoke highly of Puccinum wine alongside the very famous Italian wines of the time. So Prosecco, before becoming a sparkling wine, was one of the famed white wines of Italy. When we come to the 18th century, we start seeing the first signs of Prosecco starting to sparkle. One of the clearest examples for this comes from someone we all know very well, Casanova. While Casanova was pursuing his womanizing adventures in the town of Treviso, just outside of Venice, he wrote in his diary on 1746 that the wine of the region was like champagne and it causes merriments without intoxicating, but it cannot be kept for more than 1 year. We can say that this description of his is probably one of the most accurate one for its time. And surprisingly, the facts given there haven't really changed much either. Prosecco largely is still not a wine that's meant to be kept for more than a few years at most. and the majority of them certainly does not improve with age. Another beautiful description of Prosecco was made in 1754 by an Italian poet named Aureliano Accanti, where he wrote, "Now I want to give up my mouth to that apple-scented Prosecco." Of course, the Italian version sounds more charming. We know at this time Prosecco was made as a sparkling wine, but not with the traditional champagne method, of course, but with the simple ancestral method. How this method came to the region is unknown, but it really isn't hard to guess that it came from another wine region, as Prosecco and the surrounding region is famous for its proximity to port cities such as Venice and Trieste, which meant interaction with the rest of Europe. So maybe the method came from Limoux in southern France or somewhere else. We don't exactly know. But we know that sparkling wine was becoming popular slowly but surely at the time, so champagne was finally starting to make sparkling wines too. So the production kept increasing among the local farmers in Italy as well. And eventually, the region developed itself as a successful wine-producing region over the 19th century. So much so that in 1876, the first ever winemaking school in Italy was founded in the region. But until the beginning of the 20th century, Prosecco had always been made in the ancestral method, until the famous Charmat-Martinotti method was invented in 1895. We have mentioned the Charmat method before on one of our episodes. It's also known as tank method because it's simply done in one tank as opposed to a bottle. Charmat method was a super important development for Prosecco, but it is hardly a breakthrough when you think about it, because of how simple it is as opposed to the champagne method. In the Charmat method, the second fermentation simply takes place in big, large tanks by adding additional yeast and sugar. So the pressure trapped inside isn't as much as pressure that's trapped inside a bottle, and the effects of the contact of the wine with the dead yeast cells or lees are very minimal and negligible compared to a bottle fermented champagne. So the resulting wine is less sparkling and much less complex, with really no yeasty or toasty notes compared to a bottle of champagne. This is also the secret behind the affordability of Prosecco. It's easier and less time-consuming to produce than champagne. So the resulting wine ends up being more easy drinking, less serious, and simple. Nothing inferior compared to champagne, just simpler and different. Charmat method was the first turning point in the creation of modern Prosecco as we know of today. But until the 1960s, Prosecco was largely a mass-produced wine that was always uniform and sweet. Just as sweet as its counterpart Asti Spumante from Piemonte, actually. This style of Prosecco built an identity of being affordable and a simple wine. But Prosecco took a leap after the 60s with the development of DOCs. If you know a thing or two about your Italian wines, you might know what DOC is and what it stands for. So for the ones who don't know, what is a DOC? It's simply the abbreviation of Denominazione Origine Controllata, or in English, Controlled Denomination of Origin, meaning the product's origin and production method is protected by geographically and culturally related laws, just like champagne, as champagne is very specifically produced with the champagne method and in the limited area of Champagne. Prosecco DOC covers a historic region where Prosecco wine has been made for hundreds of years, and the name may be Prosecco, but the actual area now is spread over a very large area spanning all of the region of Friuli-Venezia Giulia and almost all of Veneto as well, which really proves how the sparkling Prosecco's influence and popularity reached over villages and even regions. Under these DOC laws, Prosecco wines can be in 3 different types according to their level of fizziness. These are spumante, frizzante, and the very rare tranquillo. Spumante is the Prosecco we are all very familiar with. Spumante is the highest level of fizziness in the Italian sparkling wine spectrum. Then comes frizzante, which is less fizzy but just enough that it can be bottled with a regular wine bottle and a regular cork or screw top opening. as opposed to a mushroom cork, which we see in many champagnes and in Proseccos as well. Frizzante Prosecco will be slightly sparkling when you first open it and pour it in the glass, but it will lose its effervescence in the glass after a few minutes or so. And Tranquillo, as the name clearly suggests, is still wine. It is simply a Prosecco wine that's not sparkling, though that being said, it is indeed very rare. And in fact, it only accounts for 5% of overall Prosecco production. Prosecco has been very famous in Italy for decades or hundreds of years. But the real worldwide popularity boom came in the 2000s. And after that, Prosecco started its unstoppable rise, which is still going on today. It is now threatening the throne of champagne as the most preferred choice of sparkling wine around the world. The real positive quality change for Prosecco, though, came in the 2010s, when Prosecco finally started focusing on making fine, quality wines by focusing on expressing the characters of the Glera grape and to focus on individuality according to location and soils. This very naturally brought sub-regions within the very large Prosecco DOC. Examples to this would be Conegliano Valdobbiadene, or even single vineyards such as Catizze and Rive. So as of today, you can see these names on bottles of Prosecco at your local wine store, selling for much more than your average Prosecco. Together with this focus came vintage wines as well. Overall, true expressions of place, grape, and year, rather than being a mediocre, sweet bubbly wine, as it was until the 60s. In fact, no vintage wine was really made until these times, as all the Prosecco that was being bottled was non-vintage, meaning all the bottles were made from a blend of wines of multiple harvest years, not just a crop of only a single year. This specific focus on quality and individuality definitely reinforced Prosecco's already increasing traction in global markets. Numbers really prove it all, as the number of bottles produced rose from 50 million in 2006 to 500 million in 2016. What a mind-boggling spike. What do you think about Prosecco? Do you like it? If so, how do you drink it, and with what do you like to drink it with? Write to us about your thoughts on Prosecco, and we'll talk more about this great sparkling wine in the upcoming episodes. Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay bubbly.
Before we end, a word from our sponsors. This episode of the Joy of Champagne podcast was brought to you by
The Excelsior by Dukes, one of the world's finest champagne flutes. 10.7 inches tall with a 10-ounce capacity. Handcrafted and mouth-blown, lead-free crystal glass. Find out more at clubdukes.co. That's spelled clubdux.co. Because there are some things man can make better than any machine.
Thanks for listening to the Joy of Champagne podcast, your guide to the world of sparkling wines. We hope you join us on the next episode. In the meantime, feel free to visit us at joyofchampagne.com or drop us an email at hello@joyofchampagne.com.